although our records only go back to the 1850s, the Chinese records go back 3,000 years. And we know when we had similar situations because we know when the famines are. And the Chinese are well aware of what happens in a famine in China. When people say the Chinese, oh, they're dumb communists. No, these people are very, very smart. They might be notorious and evil and all that, but they very well know what happens when you have a grand solar minimum.
Last year, the Federal Reserve printed more money in the month of June than they did in the past 20 years combined. Nearly 30% of all U.S. currency in circulation was printed during 2020. The U.S. dollar is on a fast track to inflation. It's more important than ever to protect your assets against rising inflation through stocks and crypto. This is why I highly recommend Trade Genius. I was able to profit myself because I learned to trade through Trade Genius Academy on the crypto side. I took part in various courses, personal coaching, chat rooms, Signals trading tool. That's where I look for price signals in cryptocurrency from Bob Kudla at TradeGeniusAcademy.com, who also offers other signature trading tools for stocks, exchange-traded funds, binary options, and commodities. All you need is an internet connection to get started. Interact with Trade Genius community, fellow traders, and certified Trade Genius trades, alongside professionals who generate revenue for themselves in the stock market every single day. Live buy and sell alerts text to your phone. Learn more by going to TradeGeniusAcademy.com. And this summer, save by using the promo code SUMMER for 40% off all non-bundled items. And now on with the video. And good afternoon, everyone. Again, our monthly talk. You're going to love it this month. It seems in earnest that everything has begun. I'm here with Bob Kudla, TradeLikeAGenius.com. If you've been looking at the news in any way, shape, or form, all we're seeing now is crop losses across all major producers. China floods again in the same regions that never recovered from last year that were the grain producers for China. South Africa, riots in the streets, and we're starting to see it in earnest. It has begun. All these things we've talked about, Bob and I, for so many years now about this grand solar minimum and the way it was going to pinch people's incomes to flow an enormous amount into agribusiness, and the way governments were not going to respond because knowing that the grand solar minimum, like his fingerprints, that repairing the infrastructure, preparing for all of this is kind of a moot point in their eyes for dragging everybody and pulling everybody through across the finish line over the next, say, decade and a half. But what are we going to do for solutions amongst ourselves? So, just when Bob and I were talking a second ago, it's begun in earnest. And you have to understand that it is in play right now, this movement. Now, the next question would be, actually two questions. How do you prepare yourself, because systems are going to be breaking down as not as reliable? And then what do you think governments are going to do in response to? Because you can see what's happening in South Africa. You think, oh, it's just hungry people on the street down there. You see how it's being responded to. So those are the two major questions: how to protect you and your families during this grand solar minimum food conundrum, for a better term, and then how governments are going to respond. So Bob Kudla, TradeLikeAGenius.com. As always, we do a monthly, and this one is going to be exciting and exceptional. And please stick with us. There's so much information about to be unfurled and unraveled before your very eyes on how all this is connecting. And again, it's about what you can do personally, how you can keep your family safe during this time, because it's going to involve money, preparedness, and so many other things in between. So Bob, I appreciate you joining me. Floor is yours.
Yeah. Hey, Dave, thanks for having me. So, great intro. Those are the things that, we've been following. So just to bring listeners up to date, and I know your loyal listeners will already know this, is that, 2024 is kind of like a bullseye for me in terms of what I would call a soft low here, in terms of maybe some activity, then a little bit of a pop, and then we dive deeper into 2030. But one thing about climate is that people think it's so aggressive, but all it is just we keep emphasizing the same areas that are going to get hotter and the same areas that are going to get colder, drier, and wetter. And what's happening is that, and you notice the news only ever picks up on the hot zones, like the Pacific Northwest. But what that Pacific Northwest is doing is driving the cold and the cool summers we're having now, basically from the Rocky Mountains all the way through the rest of the United States. In fact, the National Weather Service just gave their rest of the summer 90-day forecast, and basically anywhere from New Mexico all the way across the country is going to be colder than normal. And then in Southern California, Arizona area, warmer than normal. The coastal areas where I live, this is like a normal summer for us. We're having, it's not very warm at all in relation to some of the summers where you just get oppressive heat and no break at all. But the Northwest, all the way up into Alaska, if you notice when we had the ice ages, the areas that were warm is the Northwest to Alaska. There was no snow there, i.e. that's why the land bridge was able to be forded for people to come out of Asia and into the Americas in the first place. So when people point that out to you, just say, that's what is supposed to happen. In fact, I forget the site, but it shows where the warm and cold are in an ice age. And this is a US government statistic, warm right there. So we're going to continue to emphasize that area. It's going to be drier. And what does that mean for us? Number one is the central Washington, Central Oregon wheat harvest was a bust. I know that for sure because I have subscribers who have friends that live in that area and said basically it's burnt straw. It wasn't even worth harvesting, and that's big because that's a nice surplus region for wheat. The areas that have enough irrigation is okay, but if it stays drier there longer, the Columbia River gets its watershed out of southern Canada. If they start losing the rains up there, the Columbia Gorge is going to start to suffer. That's going to raise the cost of living in the Pacific Northwest because you're not going to be able to generate the hydro that you're generating. And in fact, one of my business partners actually lives up in Idaho. Places are closing because they're not used to the cold. I mean, they're used to colder weather, not used to the heat, and they're just not prepared for it. So they're just like shutting businesses down early, and people don't like it, and it's something they're gonna have to get used to. Now, the rest of the country, though, for America is actually in pretty good shape. Other than the northern tier, I feel bad for Canada. Other than the northern tier of the United States, we're getting enough water, and it's cool enough. The crops are doing just fine. But other places around the world are really suffering. And you talk about China. It's interesting where it's really warm. It's really wet in China. Their wheat growing, corn growing region is submerged again. And the thing about that area too, they say, well, it's up in there in the northeast of China, but it goes into the watershed that feeds the Yangtze, which goes through the Three Gorges Dam again. So you're going to have pressure on this dam again, and China's going to have to import more food. And at the same time, there's not going to be enough surplus. And then you talked about South Africa, and a shout out to my subscribers from South Africa. Praying for you guys. It's crazy there, and be safe, all of you. And so you have now some tribal, blow-ups here, but a lot of it has to do with, again, South Africa has been suffering now for a while, and so there's not enough money. The governments can't support them, and you see what happens. Like the United States, when they defund the police, there's not enough police and military in South Africa to keep hungry and angry people away from what they want to get done. And then look at Cuba. Okay, so Cuba's going as well. Again, they said there's not enough food for the people, not enough medicine for the people, and you got tyranny. So we're going into that stage now where it goes from being tolerable to now intolerable. And this happened in 2011, if you remember. We had the Arab Spring, when once again, when the governments around the world can't control their pocketbooks, it creates an environment where countries that have to import food don't have enough hard currency to do so. And we're reaching that area again. So, from our standpoint is that this will revert back into the United States because we're already on tenterhooks, and we have the four horsemen of inflation rocking now: food, energy, rent, and health. And I'll stop there, and we can kind of break those down. And I think today we had our inflation data come out. The market initially popped. It didn't like it at the close. It kind of sold off. And, we're really getting close to the top of the markets here.
Yeah, I saw some of those charts too coming out. CPI is running the hottest in 30 years. And then this transitory inflation putting food prices at 20-year highs on the terms of the amount of inflation built into food. And, you hit it on the head here. Full-blown glaciation and grand solar minimums are incredibly different. Grand solar minimums are smaller cycles riding within this interglacial period between those full ice periods on Earth. But that last glaciation cycle that ended around 12,500 years ago during the Younger Dryas period, anybody, and I'm not saying you, but anybody out there really needs to take a look at those ice age, full glaciation, 2 miles of ice over Chicago maps. The temperature maps, the areas that were ice free. And what's so interesting is how long were societies stable and knew their growth seasons after full glaciation had occurred? 40,000 years. Things changed. They locked into place. The portrait that they try to portray is that it was the entire world was covered in ice except for the equatorial bands where they were swimming in icy slush. It's not like that at all. I encourage everybody to do a little bit deeper dive in to see where areas were warmer than today, where they were ice-free during full maximum glaciation. I mean, Europe was completely covered in ice, and then you get these ice-free areas, the same areas that are starting to overlap. So you need to ask yourself, are grand solar minimums micro climates of a glaciation cycle? Because when we're looking at what's happening right now, every extreme we're seeing is off the charts, hottest ever, coldest ever. Well, our data record set only officially goes back 150 years. Some places longer in Europe, they do go back to the 1600s, and you start to see some matchups, especially like central British temperatures or central UK temperatures. Other than that, for news organizations to claim hottest ever, whatever, they only go back 150 years. We need to go back thousands of years because that's where we're transgressing to and moving toward minute by minute here. And USDA numbers that I saw, 37% of wheat in America, this is just across the wheat of all American wheat, 37% is good to very good, excellent. What happened to the rest of it? Okay, it's growing and there's some areas that are doing really well. We're blessed down in Southeast Tennessee, perfect growing conditions, just enough rain, abundant crops. Our gardens are doing so well without having to irrigate this year. Thinking about getting something during the season right now when it's at abundance and be able to store it, drive it, bag it up, freeze it, whatever you do, a way to preserve it for a longer period of time. These are solutions we need to look at because every summer we're going to get some harvest out. I highly doubt we're going to go into a summer where there's zero harvest, unless we have a volcanic eruption on a VEI 7 or 8 that would completely block the sun. Otherwise, we're always going to get harvest during the summer. And when we do, food prices are going to be much cheaper. And looking at running inflation at 30-year highs, food inflation kicking up at, also multi-decade highs, no longer transitory inflation. It's built in now. All the news media is covering it. Financial news media, front page on CNN, front page on regular everyday mom and pop, looking at whatever on the street of their news media. And it's all about rising prices, never ending, and it's going to continue. I mean, when is it going to stop? Supply chains are currently not functioning correctly. You see these articles coming out saying Christmas is a dud. We're not going to be able to get enough imports in. And why are the ports not functioning correctly where they got boats stacked up to the horizon out there? Are there not enough workers for the ports? I mean, they're paying them more than they did before to get people back to work. I mean, there's a lot of things that just don't make sense moving forward. But one thing that you might want to look into is storing your own food in an abundant crop time, just like now. And I know I rambled through a bunch of different things there, Bob, but you ticked on 4. So I thought I'd throw 4 back at you and we'll meet in the middle somewhere.
I love this stuff. So you and I can talk about this forever. And we have. I was telling people today that when we started talking in like 2013, 2014, we would go 2-3 hours in the middle of the night and record like a month's worth of recordings just because we saw this coming when nobody else, well, actually a lot of people saw it, but many people wouldn't admit it. And now it's upon us. But yeah, you're right. So I'm going to save that thought, but I'm going to talk trade genius a little bit and then
keep going there.
No, and what I was going to say is that I think what people need to start focusing on in their portfolio is that, look, we're going down the Maslow's law of safety. So you're going to want to make sure that the things in your portfolio is going to reflect an inflating environment. Don't listen to them, this transitory thing. They're just trying to talk you out of freaking out. Is that you want to own grocery stores, you want to own wholesalers. There's even a company out there, ETF out there that buys farmland. You're going to want to own that, and then you're going to own the ag chem companies, and then you're going to own some of the biotech companies that are around food. That's the areas in which you want to start looking at buying dips or swing trading into, so that you can take advantage of from the food side of it. From the energy side of it is that I'm still a big bull on uranium. And you're going to see also that once we get past the summer doldrums here at oil, I'm expecting oil to actually come down a little bit because it's just too far, too fast. We're going off the summer roll. But when we go into the next up cycle here, I think as soon as the government starts spending more money again with the infrastructure, you're going to see energy go up. So you're going to want to hold some energy named uranium, and you want to own the any producer. You want to own United States assets because you're going to start seeing expropriation of assets, and we're starting to see it in the miners. Mexico's starting to get a little jiggy here. One of my favorite silver stocks is First Majestic. They're like in a civil war with the Mexican government right now. You don't want to be an owner of a business with a country that can simply just take your assets from you. And so, you want to look at companies that have a lot more in the United States and in Canada, what I would call the Five Eye countries, right? Where, there's at least some nominal rule of law for due process, before they take things from you. And you want to stay away from, I think places like Argentina are going to be suspect, but places in Mexico might be suspect. South America in general, probably Brazil's probably the safest place, but, they don't have really, they're more ag. And then from the, the housing side is that, look, commercial real estate is going to get crushed. So you want to stay away from there. But, going back to what you were talking about earlier in terms of, the way the solar minimum is working out is that, it's just going to get the intensity is going to surprise people. But at the same time, it's different than what it was in the 1500s. So those people couldn't shift markets. We can shift markets today. But what we're seeing though is you're starting to see when you're talking about why is the supply chains, I think it's by design actually. I think countries are now going to try to limit trade between each other because they know their fiat currencies, they don't trust each other's fiat currencies. That's going to be a plug for Bitcoin as we go forward. But China's building China Inc. and the new Chinese wall. They want to basically encapsulate everything inside that yuan, and they're spending all the dollars they have now to, they're buying all the pork, all the wheat, all the corn, all the soybeans, anywhere they can get a hold of food, because, although our records only go back to the 1850s, the Chinese records go back 3,000 years. And we know when we had similar situations because we know when the famines are. And the Chinese are well aware of what happens in a famine in China. When people say the Chinese, they're dumb communists, no, these people are very, very smart. They might be notorious and evil and all that, but they very well know what happens when you have a grand solar minimum. They lose power because of the famine. So they're trying to get in front of that as fast as they can. And also, in France and Italy, their best growing regions get flooded out, in these grand solar minimums, and Turkey dries up. the Levant dries up. So we're going to have some really, really interesting plays, going forward, and water storage, which I think is the biggest crime in the United States, is that we have not invested in water storage. California, if we just had proper water storage or desal plants, California would be a non-issue. But now the central valley is drying up, and if they can't grow crops in the Central Valley, your lettuce isn't going to go from $1 to $2 a head. It's going to go to $1 to $20 a head, because it's just not going to be available, or you're just going to have to go without. So there's companies out there like APPH that are building these massive greenhouse facilities in West Virginia and other places that are going to be supplying the East Coast when California can't. And so you're going to see more of that kind of stuff too. So, all these bad things are good things, but I was shaking my head when you're talking about there'll always be just south of Manila, there is a massive, massive volcano that if you look at the lake and the island inside of it, it's like a 6 or 7 on the eruption scale potential. And it's right at the equatorial latitudes, where you get a Mount Pinatubo kind of a eruption. And then I think, then all bets are, if you see that thing go off, first thing you do is you don't go home, you go right to Smart and Final or Costco or wherever, and you better load up a year's worth of food, because when everybody else figures it out, there'll be no food left, because that will knock out some of these growing regions.
Yeah, and you start to see, hints of it around. I had a great conversation with somebody who used to run Sundance Resorts out there in Utah. They're a large buyer, and he was telling me that it's unknown a lot with the suppliers now when they're going to get, how much they're going to get. They can't guarantee out for anything. They would do, forward grow and purchase agreements with farmers. They're like, that's not possible anymore. And you start to see, when you would do a year contract with producers, now they're limiting you to 90 days for guaranteed delivery. So a lot of things are not as stable as whatever type of news media out there would have you believe it is. And what I still don't get is why, with all these problems, they haven't gone over to say, hey, everybody, why don't we try this? Why doesn't everybody start getting their own gardens up and running? Because you talk about West Virginia, that's kind of that line right there where the grand solar minimum is going to knock it down to about that latitude. And it's pretty interesting that they are choosing West Virginia right at the edge of still functionality in the summers, but non-functional, but they can still get into those winter grow seasons. And you have to wonder how much of our food is going to come from greenhouse facilities, underground facilities, indoor vertical agriculture, and how much is that going to cost versus doing it in California in the ground, because there's always going to be people with money that are always going to purchase the food. And, you mentioned the 1500s being different from today. And yeah, we have better supply chains, interconnectivity, banking, et cetera. But there's 8 billion people now. 1500s, Earth was sort of more in balance of what was grown was consumed, and on a, without all the chemicals, without all the supply chains, and it kept it in balance. It was the carrying capacity of Earth kind of regulated itself with the population generally around 500 million to 750 million through most of what we know is recorded history. But then suddenly we bumped that up to 8 billion, and even a little bit of loss here. And it's just, I don't know how the math is going to work on this moving forward. The amount of crops grown are not going to be enough to feed the planet. So then what? Then we come up with these super ultra expensive solutions, which are great. And that's the biggest opportunity in human history, what you're looking at here, providing food in a more stable grow environment, perfect nutrient mix going through, perfect storage after harvest. I mean, you're right there. You can put it in the refrigerator at the optimum temperature within minutes after the harvest versus having that on a truck for 4 hours blazing through a hot field. There's a lot of pluses to having vertical ag and really controlled greenhouse growing, but there's a huge associated cost with that. And I don't know where all these materials are going to come from instead, unless you, like you said, you start doing it at home and expropriating different factories. I mean, there's already laws on the book where they can walk into your house and take all your food for continuity of government here in the United States. So when you start looking at what's going to be required in terms of supply chains to get all these materials in place to be able to grow indoor, heaven forbid there would be a VEI 6 or 7, we would be so far behind the ball so quickly